Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global conversation around COVID-19. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this conversation as we think about multiple crises involved with COVID-19. There is the healthcare crisis, there's the financial crisis, and there's the crisis in the fight for criminal justice reform in this country, in the United States. We're on day 86 of this show and day 86 of this lockdown. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors, a social media, digital, and virtual events consulting company. I am so thrilled that you will be able to join us today for this very important conversation we're going to have about financial equality or inequality in the United States. We're live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Please share this with your friends and family. If you know someone who would benefit from this conversation, please tag them right now. Please hit share right now. And tell us where you're watching from. We always enjoy seeing who's here from all over the world. Please hit share and retweet right now and tag your friends as well. First thing we want to do is tell you a little bit about our show and who we have as a guest and what we're going to be tackling, and also our other opportunities for you to learn through our series. So tonight we are talking about financial inequality in America. And we have a very special guest. Shomari Wills is here. He's a journalist and author. And his book is called Black Fortunes, the story of the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. And that's a book of history, but he's also an expert on what is happening in America today. As we say here, it's this part of our efforts to understand 3 crises in America: the health, financial, and criminal justice crises. And we're focusing our shows on specific issues. And today it's financial inequality that we're going to be tackling. Please share this conversation right now, whatever platform you're on. If you're watching later, also you can share and help people understand the issues that we are talking about. I also want to tell you that last night, we also had a very important conversation on how to be an ally. And we had 3 fantastic guests on that show. And you can go and find that in our archives by going to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Sreenet. youtube.com/Sreenet. You can see all 86 of our shows there, as well as our New York Times read along, which takes place every Sunday morning, 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We also want to tell you about what's coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow at noon for my spin-off show from this show on WBAI. It's a radio call-in show that we call Coping with COVID-19, a hopeful call-in show. We're going to have 2 professors from Cornell University joining us. Professor Jamila Mickner is going to be here, and she's an expert in Cornell's America Studies program, and then she's an assistant professor of government. And we'll also be joined by Professor Nolaway Rooks of Cornell's Africana Studies department, and she's a professor of literature. And that's from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern. It's a radio show, so you can watch me interact with callers from all over the world who call in and have very strong points of view, which is, of course, a lot of fun and a way for us to learn together. And then we have tomorrow night, our 9 p.m. show, the next episode of this show. We'll be talking about, we'll be with a group of children and their mother. Amber Coleman Mortley will be with us. She's at Mother of All Capes, and her daughters will be talking about how to talk to kids about race. And we encourage you to listen to a special episode of Amber's Let's Better K-12 podcast, and then watch the 4 hosts on our show. She and her 3 daughters will be with us, and that'll take place tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern. So hope all of you will get a chance to tag and share with your friends these conversations. Before we bring on Shomari, I just want to thank our sponsors who make this possible. Our sponsor for tonight is Art & Co. Get involved with the world's largest online art auction fundraising for COVID-19 victims. This is artandco.net, all spelled out, artandco.net. Please take a look and please share with your friends and family. Anyone who loves art, it's based out of London and it takes place for the next couple of weeks. artandco.net, the world's largest online art auction. And finally, we want to tell you about our friends at Muckrack Academy who made it possible to have me host a free Fundamentals of Social Media course. It's a free certification course that everybody can take, and more than 3,500 people have already signed up. It's for all experience levels, all ages, all backgrounds, any industry. Anyone who wants to learn to communicate better can use this free course from Muckrack Academy. My colleague Linda Bernstein and I have learned so much putting this together. So please check out Fundamentals of Social Media, a free certification course. It starts in a couple of weeks, but save your seat now. mrac.co/social. Just take a screenshot or take out your camera and take a photograph so you can see what that is and sign up now. You know someone in your life who would benefit from that. And again, many thanks to Muckrack Academy for giving me the resources and supporting us so we can do that course for free and also support this program. And we want to thank our fabulous producers, Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon, and Rose Horowitz 31, for their production of this show for 86 straight days. I said 31. All right, are you all ready to meet Show Wills? Please stand by as I bring Show onto the show. So here we go. Please say hello to my friend, Show Wills. Hi, Show.
Hey, Sree. Great to be here tonight.
Thank you for being here. I start every show by asking our guests, how are you? Where are you? How's your family? And how are you feeling?
I'm okay. I'm doing as good as could be hoped, during, really difficult times, both, from a societal perspective and a personal perspective. I'm in Brooklyn, coming to you from my apartment. So I'm doing okay, but it's great to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. And we have comments and folks coming from all over the world who are sharing their comments, and they'll also be asking you questions. So I know you're ready for that. I do want you to hold up, if you can, your first book, because you're working on your second book. I want everyone to see that book that you wrote. Let's see where it is. There you go. It's called Black Fortunes, and it's about the story of the first group of African-American slaves who escaped and then became millionaires. And it's a fascinating story. And I was honored, Show, to be at your book launch, a virtual book launch back in the day in 2018, when we did a Facebook Live at the offices of your publisher. And I know we both learned a lot doing that. We were sitting together when we did that. And here we are sitting apart, but still together as we try to tell the stories of the African-American experience. So we're very grateful to you for being here. Let's first get from you the story of your first book and how it came together and why it is that not enough people know about this experience that happened with these particular group of people.
Well, I mean, to kind of tell the story of Black wealth was, always in my psyche. I grew up in Washington, D.C., in sort of a, middle class, upper middle class Black neighborhood on 16th Street. It was called the Gold Coast. So sort of always in the back of my consciousness that there were, all types of stories about Black people, not just stories about poverty or struggle, but also stories about people that had managed to overcome and do very well. And then when I got to the J School where we met, I enrolled in the famous book class there. And I was looking for a concept for a book, and I ended up going to Jamaica during that same period when I was a reporter for one of the Caribbean newspapers here in New York. And I discovered the first Black millionaire in the history of Jamaica. He was this swashbuckling guy. He had this big Victorian mansion, rivalry with the royals, the whole shebang. He just had a really interesting story. So I wanted to originally write a book on him. I came back to the United States, and the logistics of writing a book where all the materials were in Jamaica were difficult. So I ended up speaking with Sam, the professor of the famous book writing class at Columbia. And he said, why don't you do a book based on folks that were the first millionaires in America? And so I started looking and putting the book together, and it started me on this journey.
And tell us about how that journey ended with that first book. It came out and you surprised a lot of people because you unearthed things that most people didn't know, whether they had been keen students of history or not.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really positive reception to the book, and I was really happy to be able to do that because, the first generation of Black wealth actually started back during the antebellum period. Probably, at least 50 years before anybody would have even thought that there was even a Black upper class. You had folks that were Black millionaires. So to be able to, kind of put the names out there of people like Mary Ellen Pleasant, who's a Black woman that got rich during the gold rush in San Francisco, and also helped to fund John Brown and all sorts of, great initiatives for the abolition of slavery and women's rights. Someone that a lot of people hadn't heard of. To be able to put people like her and Robert Reed Church and just these incredible folks that have been overlooked in history to put out their stories was a really gratifying thing to do.
And give us some more of the stories that you ran into that folks wouldn't know.
So I say, probably personally, my favorite story is the story of Robert Reed Church. Such an interesting character. He was born in the Mississippi Delta on the Cotton Belt as a slave, and lived on a plantation until he was a little boy. And his mother died, and then his father, who was also his slave owner, he had a big business shipping cotton up and down the Mississippi. He was a cotton transporter. And so when his mother died, his father came and got him off this cotton plantation and said, I want you to work for me on my ships. So he grew up on the Mississippi on a boat that was shipping cotton. Was on that boat most of his adult life until it was commandeered by the Confederacy when the Civil War began. And so now he wasn't, his father's, enslaved by his father. He was now enslaved by the Confederacy. So during this famous battle, the Battle of Memphis, that took place between this naval battle between the Confederacy and the Union Navy, he jumped ship, he abandoned ship, and he swam to his freedom and kind of washed up on the shores of Memphis. And in Memphis, he was able to kind of build this unlikely empire, this unlikely business empire, and become a millionaire. And he, was able to not only generate great wealth, but he did battle with the Ku Klux Klan while he was coming up in Memphis and building his empire in Memphis. The Ku Klux Klan was forming in Nashville, Tennessee. And so he kind of battled with them his whole life. He survived a couple assassination attempts on his life. And he went on to support people like Ida B. Wells. He was her first benefactor, as well as Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass. He was kind of a behind-the-scenes financer for a lot of the early anti-racist movement in the 19th century in America.
And why is it that we don't know his name the way we should of other very successful people from that part of the history?
I often ask myself that question, why, the majority of the folks in this book, no one ever heard of them. I'm not sure. I think that, they were a little overlooked by the scholarship to a certain extent. And, most of them also did not have anyone that came and picked up their story and, told it. A lot of times people's ancestors would be the ones to kind of put descendants will be the ones to kind of put their story out there. So I kind of took it on myself as my responsibility to push their stories out there, because they're just amazing people in so many things that are foundational to the Black community and just to America. They were behind the scenes, not only providing the capital for things like John Brown's raid, the formation of HBCUs, anti-lynching movements, but they were actually there a lot of times putting their skin in the game. Robert Reed Church, for example, he didn't only fund Ida B. Wells, who was the biggest anti-lynching activist ever, and is just an incredible person. She's a hero. He was actually a member of a Black anti-lynching militia in Memphis, Tennessee. And this is a guy that was a millionaire. He's extremely rich, and he was out there with his rifle, ready to take on the Ku Klux Klan. So he wasn't just, speaking with his money, which is very important. He funded a lot of important things, but he really put skin in the game to help advance the cause. And in a way you don't see a lot of, plutocrats necessarily do. So I just think, I'm just really humbled by these people and everything that they did and had to go through.
Well, we're so honored that you would spend some time with us tonight and help us learn about this part of American history. I'm just showing people the cover of your book, so we're just going to pull that up here. This is the story of the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. Tell us about this book jacket and the cover, and what are we looking at right here?
So people ask me all the time, they're like, who is that on the cover? And I would like to know that too. This is a famous photograph by Van der Zee. For those folks that don't know, he's just an absolutely iconic Black photographer, just iconic photographer in general. One of the greatest of all times. And if you haven't had the chance to really dive into Van der Zee's work, just Google Van der Zee, and just, you'll really be treated to one of the best American photographers of all time. But this is a famous photo he took of sort of the first Black upper middle class in Harlem at the turn of the century. So my editor brought this to me. She said, "What do you think?" And of this picture. And I said, "Yeah, I love the cover." She's like, "But I got to warn you, it's a Van der Zee." And the Van der Zee family is very particular about who they let use their photographs. And she told me, so this is probably not going to happen. We love the picture, but they're probably going to say no. And so the Van der Zee family actually allowed us to use this famous photograph for the cover of the book. So I'm very honored by that.
How do you think you were able to pull that off?
I don't know. I wasn't really, I wish I had been the one, talking to him, because I'm just a huge Van der Zee fan. But I just think my editor, from what she shared with me, they just were supportive of what the book was about. And, we're happy to have the photo be a part of it. So I'm just, absolutely geeked out every time I think about that.
So I'm just going to read a little bit of background on him, because many folks wouldn't have been familiar with his name, sadly. He died in 1983. He was a renowned Harlem-based photographer known for his pose stories pictures capturing African-American citizenry and celebrity. And he developed a passion for photography as a youth and opened his own Harlem studio in 1916. And Van der Zee became known for his detailed imagery of African-American life and for capturing celebrities such as Florence Mills, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Following hard financial times, Van der Zee enjoyed a resurgence in his career late in his later years. So that is, every part of your book has stories and history in it, and even the book jacket does. And you right there taught a lot of people about Van der Zee and his legacy. So thank you for doing that. We'd like to do now what we do on the show every night, is go on a global tour by having people tell us where they're watching from, and they may have some comments and some questions for you, Show. So folks, you're watching a conversation with Shomari Wills. Please follow him on Twitter. He's at ShowWills, ShowWills. And he's an author and also a journalist. And he's working on a second book, which he'll tell us about in a little bit. And then we're going to delve into this issue of financial inequality in America, and what is the status of Black wealth in this country, and what is it that we should all learn and know. So thank you again, Show, for being with us. Are you ready for this tour?
Absolutely, can't wait.
All right, here we go. Jonathan Borstein is watching from Union Square. He has watched 86 straight episodes, so you got to give him a prize just for that. But he's also watched the crisis and the troubles and the protests and the way everything's been happening right from Union Square. So that's been interesting for him to see and report on. Neil Parekh is watching from Springfield, Virginia. He is the executive producer of our New York Times Read Along. This past Sunday, we interviewed 3 people: Sonny Slaughter, who is a business leader, and we interviewed Nobel laureate Joe Stiglitz, who turned out, I don't know if you know this, Show, he was also a Columbia professor. He was on a successor to the Kerner Commission And he said 50 years later, nothing had changed. And that is so sad when you're looking at the issues around race in America. And we'll talk more about that. I'm sure we also interviewed Dr. Mona Abaza, and we have another great show coming up this Sunday, 8:30 to 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Please join us. My father is here watching from Kerala in India. Hi, Acha. Thank you for being here. We love you. I would have been in Kerala to see you by now, but here we are. They're in lockdown there. I'm in lockdown here. Sho, have you been to Asia or to India?
I have not. It's on the bucket list, though.
Okay, we got to get you there. Our friend Diana is watching from the San Francisco Bay Area. She is a communications expert for the San Mateo County Health System and has been doing an amazing job. We salute all our healthcare workers, as you know, Sho. In this case, we're talking about the folks who tell the story of our healthcare workers as well. Anand's watching from India in Andhra Pradesh. Joy is watching from Singapore, so please say hello. And my dad says, on financial matters, the pandemic has become an unequalizer, and he's absolutely right. Everybody watching knows that we've seen stories of how the pandemic was the great equalizer, and that's not true. It showed the financial inequality in this country and how it has become worse by what's happening right now. So I'm glad my dad is talking about this, sitting all the way in India. Laurie's watching from Westchester County. You must have been to Westchester for sure. And we have also watching from Mumbai in the heavy rains and wind. Ashok is watching. Renee Edelman is watching from New York City, where our curfew started at 8. Let's talk about that for a second. We don't have curfews in New York City. We're not used to that. And here we are, prolonged curfews, several days right here in our city.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's I hesitate to get into it, but I think it's a policy. I don't know if it's necessarily coming from the best place, but it's a strange thing to say the least.
Yeah. Ashok is watching from Kerala in India. So you have a high portion of people watching from Kerala right now. Jennifer Wisdom says, sending a warm hello from New York City, Sree and Sho. And Joe Appio is watching from Atlanta, just outside Atlanta in Cumming, Georgia. Memories of Atlanta that you would like to share?
I love Atlanta. I went to college there, Morehouse College, Martin
Yes.
Luther King, and Spike Lee's alma mater. And I met my wife in Atlanta. So, hey, she's an Atlantan, so I absolutely love Atlanta.
Tell us your favorite memory of Atlanta, places you love to eat, places you love to go.
Oh, man. So I spent
It can be multiple ones, too.
I spent a total of 7 years in Atlanta. 7 years, that's right, I think. Yeah, 4 years in school and then 3 years after I graduated from college. Favorite memories of Atlanta. So the food, it's an incredible food city. I think a lot of people don't know about that. I think people are becoming aware with Richard Blais from the Food Network shows being in Atlanta. And I love some of just the soul food spots that are in Atlanta. My favorite is Eats, that's kind of a deep cut for people in Atlanta. It's a really affordable soul food restaurant in Atlanta, but it's just incredible. Mary Mac's is another soul food place in Atlanta that's just iconic. And there's a new vegan restaurant. I recently became a vegan in Atlanta. I haven't had the chance to go to it, but I'm obsessed with them on social media. They're called Slutty Vegan. So they're an absolutely hilarious, vegan spot in Atlanta. It's blowing up, and I'm just desperate to get back down there and try it.
And we're giving a shout out to all restaurants because they're in such deep trouble at the moment, in America at least. And we hope all your restaurants that you shouted out, including Slutty Vegan, is able to make it and do well. And why did you become a vegan?
It was a decision I made kind of accidentally. I think this was 2 years ago. I celebrate Easter, and so I was kind of deciding what I was going to give up for Lent that year, and I ended up giving up meat and dairy as well. And so I just gave it up, for all of Lent, and then Easter came around, and I'm like, hey, why start back up? So I just kind of kept with it.
All right, so we'll see how that goes. But you're a deeply committed vegan now. I understand. So That's good. Neil asks, Show, where did you live on 16th Street? We live on 16th at the Woodner Apartments back in 1996. Long time ago. It's very different now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I know the Woodner Apartments. Oh, my God. I used to, ride my bike past there, walk all the time there. So lived in D.C., was born in D.C. So I lived in D.C. from 83 to when I left from college, which would have been 18 years after that. I can't do the math. But then I also lived there for a couple years right after Obama took office. So during the Obama years, I was kind of in D.C. doing some government stuff. So, spent a lot of time in D.C., but we grew up in 16th Street in the 80s and the 90s. It was a really magical place. Shout out to Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's just a legendary person. She was my neighbor in D.C. I was always very, very proud of that. Not next door neighbor, but I used to see her at the drugstore all the time and get a kick out of it.
I want to make sure that, Joe, you had a chance to share this show on your networks, especially on your Facebook and Twitter. So I hope you had a chance to do that. We want everyone to do that, folks. Share this. We're having a great conversation. We're learning a lot. We're sharing. We're connecting. Please ask questions. And we're going to jump into this issue of financial health of America, and especially African Americans. So please do tag your friends. Even if they can't watch live, they can always watch it later. What was it like to see DC on fire these last few days? Last night we had Rahul Dubey on our show. Rahul sheltered 70 protesters who he brought into his home as the police, he said, were hunting them in DC. And the president said that he wants the military on the streets, and the tension between the DC mayor and the president. Talk a little bit about those issues, please.
It's absolutely surreal, to see those images. And it's absolutely not in the spirit of what DC has always been about. You can go back through every historical period in DC from the Reagan years. He was vigorously protested in DC. I was alive for some of those years. To the 70s, the 60s. Of course, we know Martin Luther King, the March on Washington. So DC has always been a place that tolerated protest. This kind of spasm that we've seen is just it's disappointing, and it's sad. The response to the protests and some of the images is hard. I wish I was there right now. It's kind of hard to watch from a distance, because DC is so close to my heart, and so are the people. And I know they're just out there trying to organize and try to protest and trying to be Americans, because this is what Americans do. We argue, we protest, we debate. The founding fathers debated vigorously. That was portrayed wonderfully in Hamilton, that conflict and dissent and fighting and arguing and disagreeing, that's part of America. So I just think the desire to sort of squelch that is it's a little un-American to me. It's definitely.
I think I agree completely, and it's very un-American. Here is Jacqueline Dolly saying, all these companies posting messages of support can do more to create financial equity. Many of them do not hire black small business vendors. They look at inclusion as limited to affinity groups, training, and maybe one or two black faces in the C-suite level. There is no business equity because of the color line. And first of all, I want to say to Jacqueline, I've known her for 15, 20 years. She's someone who has worked inside American corporations and nonprofits. And Jacqueline, would love to have you on the show when you have time. And thank you for watching multiple days and sharing every time. It means a lot to me personally. Thank you, and show over to you.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the great ironies, of the Blackout Tuesday and some of the solidarity, some of the corporations have shown with this movement, is that we don't want it to just be a marketing tool, because there's something in this for a lot of these corporations to come out and put out these messages. It's a marketing opportunity to them. They're getting eyeballs and clicks. And, some of them mean well. Some of them are just taking advantage of the opportunity. And 100% the way we know that is by looking at what they're doing, just beyond the marketing, the affinity marketing. And if they're giving opportunities to African Americans in terms of employment, in terms of investment, are they using African American vendors, women vendors, minority vendors, South Asian vendors, Latinx vendors, and the list goes on and on. So we have to make sure that this solidarity they've shown with folks is not just is not just surface. That it's it's not just skin deep.
Thank you. Jacqueline says this is fascinating, and Rose says here's a link to Shomari Wills' book, Black Fortunes: The Story of the First 6 African Americans Who Escaped Slavery and Became Millionaires. And we'll talk more about the book too as we go along, as well as the research on his next book that he's working on now. Lori's tagging friends. Everyone, please do this right now. You know someone who would benefit from listening to Shomari and his thoughts on what's happening in America today, as well as America in the past. This is an education, folks. Please tag a friend right now. Please share this right now. James says, awesome stuff. Thank you. And Jim Rosenberg says, hi, Santiago and I are sending you good vibes from DC. So Jim is a good friend, and we're glad he's doing that. And here's the link. And Paula is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Have you been?
Tallahassee, Florida. Oh my goodness. My grandmother was from Tallahassee, Florida. So she grew up in Tallahassee, Florida with her twin brother on a farm. And she grew up on a farm there that her family owned. And she kind of had a very unique experience. She grew up during Jim Crow. But unlike my grandfather, her husband, who was a sharecropper, she actually had the opportunity to grow up on a farm that her family owned. And it's just very formative for her, that for her, agriculture, and that time being agricultural in the South, was an empowering time for her family. They were entrepreneurs. My grandfather is from South Carolina on my father's side. He grew up on a farm in South Carolina, which his family actually fled after his brother was lynched. So I definitely have fond feelings of Tallahassee. I think of it often whenever I think of my grandmother.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can, for people to hear that there are folks like you who have stories in their family of incredible pain, it might surprise some people that it's that close what we were discussing in terms of the kind of racial injustice and crime that used to happen. How did you first learn about some of these incidents, and how did you come to terms with them as a young man and then as a Black man as you grow up?
Well, I mean, we all have heard, hopefully now, about the talk, how, a lot of, Black kids growing up, their parents have to have the talk with them about how to deal with police, to protect themselves and stay safe. My great uncle, that's how it was introduced to me, because he was killed after he got in an argument with a white clerk at a store. And, they got in an argument. The guy didn't think a Black man should be, speaking to him that way, that he should be, submissive, I guess is the word. And he was not. That my grandfather and all his brothers were very, very strong-willed people. My grandfather is a Korean War veteran. He's also an Olympian. Came from destitution, came from poverty, and he just had an incredibly strong will to get to the Olympics and to, fight in the war. And he's a skilled worker later on in life. But his family was very strong-willed, as was his brother. And he got in this argument with a white store clerk. And as a result of raising his voice to a white man, or arguing with a white man, he was killed. He was lynched. And, that story, I remember hearing that story when I was just maybe 6-7 years old. Within the context of being told, look, you have to be very careful how you talk to white people. You have to be very careful of how you especially talk to white authority figures, because it can become extremely dangerous for you, as it was for your, great uncle who's no longer here anymore. So that was my version of the talk, hearing about this lynching story. So that was something I always had in my consciousness, growing up. Unfortunately, I've had conversations with other people who've had the same thing happen within their family. So it's not as rare as it should be, unfortunately.
Tell us about the talk as it happens in families. What has been your experience with the police and authority figures as you made your way in life?
I don't think I ever really had to talk specifically about police with my. I don't think anybody ever gave that to me. Just the kind of the talk of hey, it's not just police officers. It's my great uncle wasn't killed by a police officer. He was killed by a citizen. As we see in the case of Trayvon Martin, is a great example. Sometimes it can just be somebody with a weapon that decides that they want to be your executioner and your judge. And so I was just always taught to be very aware of your surroundings. I was just kind of always on the lookout for danger. And I think that's not a great way, to grow up. I'm raising a daughter now. And, I think for me, definitely affected me. I've always kind of kept authority figures at sort of arm's length. I've always been very, very wary of authority, for that, not necessarily, bucking authority, though I definitely did when I was a teenager. Just always you grow up just always being cautious, always assessing risk. And I've applied that to interactions, certainly with the police, but, it's beyond that. Sometimes it's just when I was with my wife in Atlanta and just driving at night and going, down a side road, in a little country town, and having to be aware, this is kind of dangerous, because the Klan is still out there. We have a problem with, violent white supremacists in this country, unfortunately, as we saw with Dylan Roof. And, unfortunately, I think we'll see similar things happen again and with Charlottesville. Just that cautiousness, that your awareness and, your ability to assess risk as a Black person is key to staying alive, sometimes, unfortunately.
That is so sad and painful to hear. We know it's there, but to see you and hear you talk about it is so makes it so real, I think, for a lot of us who ourselves don't have to have the talk with my 17-year-old children. For us in our community, the talk is about dating and sex and drugs. That's the talk. And for African Americans, of course, that's also part of the talk. But the talk is how to stay alive. And that's something that I think is very important for people to understand, that's the case. If we can, we're just going to look at who else is watching. Sonali's watching from LA. Any LA memories you want to share?
I love LA. I'm working with two great partners out in LA to make a television adaptation of my book. So I love it. Shout out to Stephanie Elaine. Look her up. She's doing some great stuff now.
Tell us her name again, Stephanie.
Stephanie Elaine, Allain.
Okay.
She's doing some fantastic stuff, both with COVID, raising money for sort of people that work behind the scenes in Hollywood, and are without income because of COVID and the shutdown. And she's also doing great work with just activism, and she was one of the first Black executives out in Hollywood. I'm just really honored to be working with her. And Mel Jones, who is sort of Stephanie's protege. She's an amazing up and comer out there. So I love LA. Sometimes I close my eyes and I pretend I'm out there when when I get a little stressed out. So
here's her Wikipedia page, and it says that she personally pitched Columbia's executives on John Singleton's Boys in the Hood, which of course became a big hit. And among the films under her supervision were Poetic Justice. You remember that film with Tupac and Janet Jackson, I Like It Like That, and The Craft. And the importance of having our voices, diverse voices in settings like that's very, very important. Let's see, Manish Chanda says hello from Albuquerque. Have you been?
I have not been to Albuquerque. Okay. I have
not. Rose is talking and tweeting. Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana_Menon are producers of the show. Please follow them and connect with them. Joe says he's going to work as a contact tracer, and these are the kinds of jobs that a lot of people are going to be taking up now. And Mark Lee is watching. Mark was my guest on yesterday's show. He's from Durham, North Carolina, and he says India is on my bucket list as well. So many places from abroad that are on my bucket list as well. And he says that he got trained by Johns Hopkins, and now just have to figure out how to get that job. The Johns Hopkins, he figured out how to got that contract pacing job. Karapaya is watching from Bahrain. Have you been to the Middle East?
No, that's another place. I've been to Canada and Europe, but that's about it. I haven't been to Asia at all.
Look at Julio came right in as soon as you said Canada. So they showed up from LinkedIn. And your favorite memory of Canada?
I love Montreal, man. I love poutine, in the snow. I go up there when it's cold, which is kind of weird. I know, but I love Canada.
Yeah, my wife and kids and I went out when it was so cold that Montrealers said it was cold. It's the coldest Christmas in memory. I'll never forget. Jonathan says Atlanta has a great puppet museum. Did you know that?
Yes, I actually did. I did.
Belinda says, Sree and Show, greetings to you both. Heavy wind and rains in Mumbai. Very interested to read Show's book. Was not aware of it. So there you go. We're getting people to see his book. It's called Black Fortunes, and his full name is Shomari. Wills, tell us the origin of that name, please.
Oh, so my mom picked out the name. My folks met, in the 70s in something called the Atlanta University Center. It's comprised of several HBCUs in Atlanta that all occupy the same space. And they were both involved in the Pan-African and Black nationalist movement on campus. My dad went to Morehouse. My mom went to Spelman. A funny story about my mom. My mom's best friend in college was Samuel L. Jackson's wife. She was his girlfriend back then. And so she used to hang out a lot with Samuel and his wife. And there's this famous thing that happened where a group of Black activists, group of students, locked up the board of trustees at Morehouse College. They chained the doors because it was part of this movement to try to force colleges to have Black studies programs. So they didn't have a Black studies program at Morehouse. And so there was a group of students from Morehouse who were involved. My dad wasn't involved. He thought he was going to get in trouble, so he didn't get involved. But Samuel L. Jackson was involved, and so was my mom. And so they locked up the board of trustees, this big activist thing to try to force them to have a Black studies movement. And so eventually, after the standoff ended, the male students from Morehouse got punished and the girls didn't. So my mom was able to go on and continue school. Samuel L. Jackson got expelled because of this. And so he got expelled from college and he left school and went and became an actor. So, that's kind of the funny ways life works sometimes.
I had no idea. So African-American students had to fight to get African-American studies or Black studies in a historically Black university. How was that? What was the opposition even within an HBCU?
Well, I just think there was like a general feeling that, it sounds crazy, but that Black studies was not like a real academic discipline. And, there's very famous protests at Berkeley, as well as a couple of the Ivy League schools to try to force them to have Black studies programs, but had to go through the exact same struggle at HBCUs unfortunately, which sounds crazy to me. But yeah, they were both part of that struggle, and ended up going in very different directions because of it.
Right. Well, Julio is still laughing at Slutty Vegan, the name of your favorite vegan restaurant in Atlanta. Kristen is watching from Northfield, Minnesota. Minnesota, of course, our thoughts are with the family of George Floyd in Minneapolis, where all of this went down about 10 days ago. And we are now seeing a nationwide movement that has come on, and people are paying attention. Why do you think that this particular killing has gotten so much attention and has galvanized so many people, not just African Americans, but people of all colors were out on the streets and marching?
I think this one is just so clear. I think there's no way to dismiss it. Unfortunately, I think this is not the first time, we've seen an unarmed, black man have their life taken, or, there's also a lot of people of all races, who are, who experience police brutality. There was a young man, a white man in Maryland, near where I grew up, who was actually killed by the police last year while he was at home, allegedly in bed with his girlfriend. But these types of things have been going on for a long time, and we've seen so many unarmed black men have to have their lives unnecessarily taken, and often it's dismissed. They'll somehow attribute blame to the person that was killed. Well, they shouldn't have been doing this, they shouldn't have been doing that. Maybe they were resisting, maybe whatever. I think with George Floyd, I just think it's just so clearly homicide, and it was an execution. It's one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen in my life. And I think if you watch that video and you came away feeling that was okay, you don't have a heart. It's just anybody who has any humanity within them that watched that video couldn't come away thinking, well, there was a reason for that, or maybe things are not that bad. That it was just a wake-up call, for folks that some of whom have been sleeping for too long. But welcome to the struggle.
Oh, I urge everyone who hasn't seen this yet to type in George Floyd and Hassan Minhaj, who did a masterful takedown of the current situation, and he showed a series of clips of people like Judge Jeanine Pirro and Rush Limbaugh upset at the killing of George Floyd and saying that this is unacceptable. So when they say that, then you can imagine how ridiculous and unacceptable the situation is. If even people on Fox are saying that, of course, everything else they've done has been so awful and so terrible, and focusing on just and any of the violence that happened, or any of the looting or anything, instead of focusing on the protesters, the peaceful protesters. Here's a comment from Jim Rosenberg. Shomari, the issue of financial inclusion is still not solved despite all the progress of the past decades. Based on your research, what needs to change for the financial sector to seriously, effectively support Black entrepreneurs?
Access to capital. I think there's two things that really drive racial wealth inequality. There's hundreds of things, but there's two things that I believe drive it the most, which are inherited wealth, which Black people have less of, for many, many reasons. Some people's wealth is stolen before it can be passed down to their children, which is a big issue at the center of my book. But the other one is access to capital. It's just harder for African Americans to get access to capital, whether it's a loan. We saw that with the PPP program, that a lot of African Americans were not at the front of the line to get access to those loans. It could be venture capital. I have a friend, I'm not going to mention their name, but they are a serial entrepreneur, extremely successful person. And, they confided in me that sometimes they will look for a white person to add to the management of their company, because when they go in and they try to raise money, it's easier if they have a white person that is, part of the company. I think that's extremely sad that someone would have to do that. But just access to capital, whether it's loans, whether it's venture capital, And in certainly when you go up the level to the next level of investment, there's a massive disparity there. But you look at something like just the PPP loans and venture capital, for example, they're dependent on relationships. The people that had a relationship with a bank, had a line of credit at the bank, they were the first people to get the PPP loans. So if you didn't have that, I think that was more true for African Americans than it was maybe for other groups. You couldn't get access to the PPP loans. Venture capital is about who you know. It's about, do you have the relationships to be able to walk in and make a presentation? Do you have the credibility? So if you don't already have those relationships, which a lot of times are based on people you may know from college, people that may be in your social circle, people you may have worked with before venture capital, it's just harder to get access. So I think I think we have to address banking within in the Black community. I also think we have to address venture capital, and then from there, I think we also need some direct investment, on the part of the government to help spur Black entrepreneurship and support it.
Thank you for sharing that. Lots of questions and comments coming in. We have a few minutes left with Shomari Wills, who's author of, can you hold up that book again? I love seeing that cover. Here we go. This is his first book. It's called Black Fortunes, the story of 6 African-American slaves who escaped and became millionaires. What was it? How is that even just the whole title sounds so unlikely, right? How do you go from slave to a millionaire? How did that happen? And what are the lessons for today from that? What are the parallels you see, if any, what's happened then and what's possible now?
I mean, you have to be a genius. One of the characters in my book, Mary Ellen Pleasant, who's a Black woman, she went to San Francisco during the gold rush, 1849, which slavery ended, almost 15 years after that. So she was in San Francisco during the gold rush while slavery was still going on, and she got involved in business. Started small with small businesses like money lending and laundromats, and then scaled up to have these, incredibly, opulent boarding houses where, rich bachelors would stay. The governor of California stayed at her, boarding house at one point. But she was just so industrious and so smart and so determined that, I think it was, I believe some people say that this is apocryphal, but it's attributed to W.E.B. Du Bois that he said about Mary Ellen Pleasant, if she had been a white man, she would have been president. Because she was this young Black woman that was able to come from, sort of an uncertain parentage. She was a shop clerk in Nantucket as a child. All the way to be a multi-millionaire, who fraternized with the governor, who was one of the richest people in California. And these people were just incredible people, and as far as they rose, if they hadn't been Black, they probably would have gone even further.
And that's so sad after all these years to think that it still depends so much on the kind of societal settings for which the connections, networks, all of that matter, don't they? Here we're just looking at your table of contents for your book, Black Fortunes. Do you want to pick out a couple and tell us things that we should know and why we should get your book available on any online store that people can find?
So I'm just looking. I haven't looked at this in a while myself. The story of Oklahoma that I was able to tell in the book, which is, if you read the chapter 40 Acres Deferred, which is basically like the story of the development of Oklahoma from a Black person's perspective. And Oklahoma is really interesting because it was envisioned for a time for Black people to be sort of like an Israel of sorts, that it was going to be a refuge for African Americans after slavery to build, their own, sort of community and have their own institutions. And we all know the story of Black Wall Street, but it came out of that. So 40 Acres Deferred is one of my favorite chapters. I love The Most Powerful Black Man Alive, which is the conclusion to Robert Reed Church's story, who at the end of his life was one of the most powerful men in the South, and he was a Black man. He was a mega donor to the Republican Party, which was, as we know, that was the left party back then, the Republican Party. He was a mega donor. He was one of the folks that helped Booker T. Washington get a meeting at the White House with President Roosevelt, which was extremely controversial. And if people don't know about this, Roosevelt had Booker T. Washington, who was a Black activist, for dinner at the White House. He was the first prominent Black guest ever at the White House, and people they lost it. They were so offended to see a Black man in the White House dining with the president, but he made that happen because he was so powerful and so influential within the Republican Party. He was a massive financier. He basically financed the rebuilding of Memphis after it was wiped out by the yellow fever. He was just this incredibly powerful man, and he was Black. And, the end of his life and how he was able to finally beat the Ku Klux Klan and beat the Confederacy, the Sons of the Confederacy. They tried to hold him down. Is incredible. As a young man, he was kind of a gunslinger. He used to fight oppression with his gun. He was known for, after he was assassinated, an attempted assassination when he was a young guy by a race mob, he always carried a pistol. And if you threatened him, he would shoot at you. But as an older man, and in this chapter, he actually uses politics and money to outsmart the Confederates, the Sons of the Confederacy. So that's one of my favorites because it's just really, in a lot of ways, to me, the great triumph of his life. There's so many stories. There's 6 different characters in the book and lots of other small characters and, characters I wish I could have put in. So I hope folks really get to know some of these folks and get a chance to check it out.
And we'll hopefully get to see this on TV in the months and years ahead. Here's an incredible blurb for your book, a testimonial from Margot Lee Shetterly, the author of Hidden Figures, the story which everybody knows now was made into a movie, and the story of the women who helped make NASA what it is today. By telling the little-known stories of 6 pioneering African-American entrepreneurs, Black Fortunes makes a worthy contribution to Black history, to business history, and to American history. Before we take some more comments, I wanted to ask you to just give us a few of the stats that you're using to understand the wealth gap in this country. What should we know about the current situation with African Americans today in this country in terms of finances, money, et cetera? I know you have some stats that you've been researching.
So, one of the really interesting things to think about is if we think about the working class and the middle class, the size of those two groups is very comparable between Black America and everybody else. About 60% of Black people are either middle class or working class. This is very similar for most other communities. It's when you get into sort of the bottom and the top that you see an over and an underrepresentation. So when you look at the people that are poor, it's about 28% of African Americans are, lower income, which is about twice what it is for most other communities. And then when you look at upper middle class and wealthy, it's about half what it is for other communities. So the story of wealth in the Black community is you have this pretty significant middle class and working class. Is the majority of the Black community, but it's economically bottom heavy and top light. And there are some specific things that are causing that dynamic to happen. And I touched on it access to capital, generational wealth, but then we also have certain, structures that are not only preventing people from making it to that very top, but, forcing or creating a trend for folks to fall out of the middle class and the working class to the bottom at a faster rate than they should. And I think it's important for people to kind of understand that distribution, because I think there can be a narrative that all Black people are poor, which is not really a helpful thing, and I hear a lot of people say, oh, what are we doing? All Black people are poor. How do we help them? So on and so forth. Or a lot of politicians, racial justice program is a poverty program. Most Black people aren't poor. They're working class, middle class. It's about how do you keep Black people from falling out of the working class and the middle class down to the bottom? And how do you help the people that are lower income rise up and have that American dream of rising up to the middle class or even becoming wealthy? So I think understanding that there's a lot of economic diversity within the Black community, but the structure of that, if we think about that, we can help. There was a great article about how Black folks, Black boys specifically in the New York Times, and Black girls who grow up middle class, who grow up upper class, are much more likely to fall down the economic ladder than white kids. And so I think when we think about mobility, that there's it's a slippery ladder for, Black folks to slide down that ladder, but it's a hard climb up with lots of pitfalls. And so I think if we think about that ladder and what proportion is poor, what proportion is rich, what proportion is middle class, I think we can talk about these programs without talking in stereotypes. Because when you see all race problems as poverty problems, that's racist, right? It's not. Racial problems aren't poverty problems. The problems we have in our community are with merit, access to opportunity, and mobility. And Black folks, the mobility is, the momentum of our society tries to pull African Americans downward, and there's a ceiling to keep African Americans from moving upward. And I think if we think about it like that, we can be much more helpful when it comes to this problem.
Thank you for sharing. Mark says, unfortunately, COVID has hit some of our most long-ranging businesses, beauty salons, funeral homes, gyms, and even our Black press has been hit by COVID-19. You know that stat that everyone keeps saying is that before COVID-19, 40% of Americans couldn't write a $500 emergency check if they had to, meaning they couldn't go across the country for an unplanned trip. And in the days since the crisis, it's obviously become much worse. Unemployment at 20%, 15%, it came down a little bit today. And the president has this idea that somehow if the economy comes back, everything will be fine with the Black community. He was asked about George Floyd and how, why is he not doing anything about systemic racism? He said, we're going to fix it with the economy, because even when the economy was good, it wasn't helping everybody. And it certainly wasn't helping those poorest of the Black folks that you described.
Yeah, wow. So, a lot of these businesses, Black businesses, and all businesses, a lot of main streets are going to be destroyed, and I think we have all types of main streets in America. But I think one of the great ironies of COVID is that, the small business person has not gotten as much help as the corporation. We have the Federal Reserve, which is this complicated thing, but they're basically, printing money and, pushing it into the asset markets, pushing it into corporations. And then for sort of small businesses, you have the PPP program, which I'm glad we have it, but it's not as robust as this liquidity program for corporations and for the asset markets. Small businesses were forced to close, and they're not getting as much help. And, I agree with the lockdown. I'm not an anti-lockdown person, But I think we have to understand that these businesses did not close because they did anything wrong. They were forced to close. And the same way we've supported the asset markets, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed, a couple of days ago said he would do whatever it takes to support the asset markets. We have to have the same attitude towards small business and, towards workers, that we will do whatever it takes to make sure folks are okay. And the PPP program, it's a good program, I think, but we need to do more because African-American businesses are some of the most vulnerable businesses. A lot of businesses will be lost, but ones that did not necessarily have the balance sheets to weather this are, going to be destroyed, and a lot of main streets are not going to come back from this.
And that's so sad to think about that's the case. Jacqueline Dolly says, white people drive across the country all the time and do the Appalachian Trail, camp in the wilderness. Black people have to think twice. We are not free to hit Route 66 whenever we want to. Our freedom is limited and conditional. It's so painful to hear this. Those of us who are from other communities, including people of color, are privileged in many ways in this country, and we wouldn't think twice about the issue of driving across the country as the way that some African Americans have to. Russell says, loving the stories here. Hello from Atlanta, Russell Clinton. And Akbar is watching from Muscat, Oman. Apollo is watching from Las Vegas. He says, the biggest leverage against a Black person's credibility is doubt. Just express doubt and racism does the rest. And that's certainly one way of thinking about the problem. Mark is reminding us of Emmett Till, which was a homicide as well, and so many homicides in African-American history and such pain in African-American history. We had a question earlier, what do you attribute to the success of today's Black millionaires and billionaires? What have they been able to do? Any lessons for the community that we can think about in terms of financial equality?
It's tough. The first thing that comes to mind is Robert Smith. He's the richest Black man in America. He's a hedge fund guy. And, the way he got his fund started, or, with hedge funds, you have to go and find these wealthy people to let you manage their money and invest their money. What he did was he had a white partner. And, his white partner presented himself as the head of the firm to investors. And so they invested their money, and it was actually Robert that was doing a lot of the managing behind the scenes. He's a billionaire. He's on the cover of Forbes not too long ago. But, I think obviously being savvy is a requirement. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I think that the secrets to being successful as an entrepreneur, as an African American, are, very similar to what, the keys to being successful are for anybody. But sometimes you have to, navigate around these biases. And you mentioned doubt, and racism does the rest. I mentioned my friend that had to add a white person to the management of their company to get venture capital funding because they wanted to get around that doubt that it would have been harder to get funding with all Black management group, which is the reality. And this person that's gotten multiple things funded, and they just know that. They just know, like, if you have a white person that's part of your management group, it becomes easier to get funded. And that's just a sad reality. And I think the only way to change that is to really call it out. Transparency, about who's getting funded. There's a lot of VC firms that have never funded a project with an all-Black management team. They've never funded a project with an all-women management team. They've never funded a project with all South Asian, management team, and it never gets called out because nobody knows. Nobody knows who's getting opportunities and who's not, and I think the key is transparency, because I think if a lot of companies and a lot of investors had to have their track records, laid bare, I think behavior would change a little bit because I don't think all of them will be proud of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Shiva Ramesh is watching from Cupertino, the home of Apple, and a lot of Silicon Valley success stories. Very interesting and thoughtful conversation. Look forward to reading the book. Again, it's called Black Fortunes by Shomari Wills. Please check it out. Stephen Kaplan says, Shomari, where is he? Says, thank you for sharing all of these stories and personal insight. So appreciate it all. Hashtag educate Americans. Hashtag Black History. And I just want to say that Stefan has a show tomorrow, COVID-19 show. He's interviewing a photographer who has done really important work in this time. Everybody can find this at Stefan Kaplan is Stefan Spinett Social on Facebook and at Spinett Social, 10 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, a special Saturday edition of his show. So everybody can check that out. Show, I need to let you go because I said we'd keep you for 45 minutes. Already been half an hour more than that. Anything else we should keep in mind as we're reading the news, watching the news? We want to learn, and we are so grateful to our friends who are able to make the time and come here. But one of the things that some of our guests have said in the past, don't make me do the work. So I'm asking you, Show, what should I be reading? What should I be looking at? Where can I go? Give me some things to look at, and our audience. And of course, talk about your second book as well, please.
I just think keep watching the news, keep paying attention, to what's going on. For those of us like you and I, Sree, that are avid news watchers, we'll keep watching. But just don't look away, from what's going on. And just continue to pay attention. The other thing that I did want to mention is if there's one thing I would love folks to check out, I'd love you to Google the name David Driscoll. David Driscoll was a friend of mine and a family friend and sort of a mentor, and he passed away 2 months ago from COVID. He was a tremendous African-American art curator, perhaps the most prolific African-American art curator in the United States. New York Times did a nice little write-up on him, but, I just urge folks to dive into David Driscoll because we really lost a great one. And, he was the curator for the African Art Museum in D.C. for quite some time. And a brilliant artist. I mean, you have some of his art up there. He's an incredible artist himself, in addition to being a curator. So, we've lost so many great people to COVID, and he was just an incredibly great guy and a cherished friend. And, I miss him. We lost him. So if you have some time, take a look at some of David Driscoll's art and his curation. I think you will be richly rewarded for doing so. And
your second book?
The second book, I can't really say too much about it right now. I can't even tell you the title. I'm not a secretive person, so I don't like doing that, but I'm not quite allowed. But it's along those lines. The book is about, it's kind of, to me, the companion to Black Fortunes, which was looking back retrospectively at Black wealth. This book is going to be looking forward at what the future of Black wealth and what the future of Black America is. I can't wait to tell people about it when I can. I'm blabbermouth, so I love saying things, before I'm supposed to say them. So I'm trying to avoid doing that here.
I hear you. And what I hope is you will come back and also give us a chance to talk about the book when it is ready and you're able to talk about it. What was it like writing during the pandemic?
Oh, you know what? I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this, Sree. And, some of my friends who are watching, shout out to my friend Russell, who is a new dad, trying to work and to parent and to homeschool at the same time is a challenge. I think the homeschool part is even harder than the writing. Like when I sit down to write, that's kind of my me time. And, that's kind of the easy part of my day. But it's given me a whole new respect for teachers and what teachers do. Because it's not easy. It's not easy being the teacher. So yeah, that's been, I always had an appreciation for teachers. My mother was a teacher. I come from teachers, but you're a teacher teachers, Sree, but certainly not to kids with a tremendous amount of energy.
No.
It's really a tremendous undertaking.
Now, can I just show you I think there'll be like what we call landmark tweets from this era of the pandemic. This will be one of them. This was Shonda Rhimes this was her first day of being a homeschool teacher with her kids. She said, been homeschooling a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old for 1 hour and 11 minutes. Teachers deserve to make $1 billion a year or a week. And I think we can relate to this for sure, isn't it?
It's very true. It's very true. She's a great writer, and she summed it up perfectly.
And I think it's really important for the rest of America to have role models in every sphere, right? We have people in music and sports and business and arts and culture. We need African Americans who are able to show the way how people can be at the very top of the game. Yesterday, Rahul Dubey, who was a guest on our show, he sheltered 70 people in his house, and he said that the Indian community is very good at praising African Americans when that they're at the very top, but we don't do enough for people who are not at the top, at the lower end. What can we do? And so we appreciate all ideas and thoughts that anyone may have on how we can get more communities to be allies and to help African Americans and all people of color who are in financial and other distress in this country at this time. So with that, I'm going to let show go. Shomari Wills is his name. Please check out his book, his fantastic book, Black Fortunes. I forgot to tell you that after I interviewed you, after we launched the book, I got to go to Oklahoma. And at every dinner and lunch that I was at, I was able to show off all my knowledge about Oklahoma from your book. And people living in Oklahoma didn't know that part of the African American story. And it was I was able to wield that information in a good way.
Oh, that's just awesome, man. I love Oklahoma. I love the folks there. And, everybody's aware of it because Watchmen is a fantastic show. So if you're reading the book, watch the Watchmen television show from HBO as well, which marvelously kind of weaves the Tulsa story in there. I was a huge fan of that series. And when it came out, everybody was, sending me messages like, "Are you watching this?" Because they do the Tulsa story really well. It's part of this fantastic superhero story. But I thought it was really, really, really something else.
Here's a comment just for you. You can read this comment out loud.
I agree with Shonda 100%, and that includes a 13-year-old too. Laugh out loud. Schools reopening can't come soon enough. Kids need to let that energy out. It's amazing how much energy kids have. I don't really understand. Like, where does it come from? Is it their diet? Like, where does it come from?
All right, folks, we're going to let Shomari go. He was even a little under the weather, and he still agreed to come. I'm so grateful. Shomari, congrats on all the work you've done. Congrats on already working on another book. Those of us are still working on trying to come up with an idea for book number 1. You're already out on book number 2. I want to give you a chance to give a shout out to Sam Friedman and his book writing class at Columbia.
Shout out to Sam Friedman. He is the GOAT. And his book writing class is it's a crucible, and it's an experience, and he's created so many authors and generated so many books. It's amazing. And, Sam is the GOAT, that sums it up.
Here's his website where you can learn about, it's a samfriedman.com, samuelfriedman.com is the website. And there he is. And he's written many books. And even if you don't get into his class, don't go to Columbia, reading the articles, reading the books, something like 75, 80 books have come out of that class. And that's all there. And you can check that out. And some articles about how to write books are also there. So you'll be inspired if you check that out. And we also have here some more last comments to say goodbye to you. And congrats, Shomari, says Apollo, and hugs to Shomari, and God bless. Thank you very much. Good luck with your family, and good luck with that homeschooling.
I'll need it. Thank you, Sree, and thanks for everything. Thanks for doing the show. We need it.
Thank you, and everyone, including show. If you have any ideas for guest themes, please let us know. I feel so privileged to have this global pedestal where I can talk. Please tell me who else needs to be here and who else we can bring on. So thank you very much, Shomari. We'll let you go.
All right, thanks, Sree. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. Folks, that was Shomari Wills. I hope you learned as much as I did. And we're going to now close out the show with what I've been doing the last couple of days. I interviewed the great Kimberly Crenshaw, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality on my WBAI radio show last week. And she said, one of the things she said is say their names, say their names. And so we're going to say their names. And what we mean by they is the names of the people who have been killed in police brutality incidents. And I'm also going to show you the cover of the current issue of Time magazine, where they have put the names on the cover right there. You can see them, and I'm going to read out these names. And when I do, it is difficult to hear and difficult to think about, but that's the point. And so I'm going to read out these names, and thank you for listening as we read them out. The names are that they, and by the way, this is the inspiration for this cover by the great African-American artist Titus Kaffir, is this cover of a mother and the child taken away. And look at this picture of George Floyd and his mother, Larcenia. You're looking right at her and the kid. What a picture. And the names are on this list, and I'm just going to read the names that are there. And this is not everybody, of course, we know that, but we must say their names. Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jerame Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Sandra Bland, Darius Stewart, Samuel DuBose, Janet Wilson, Callan Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher, Chad Robinson, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmaud Aubrey, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. They are on the cover of this issue of Time magazine. Very powerful, very sad, tragic cover, and this photograph is so sad. A picture of a young George Floyd with his mother, Larcenia. And I urge everyone who is watching today and who has the opportunity to learn the full story of what's happening in this country to please do that. Please share the show with your friends and family. There are people you know who would benefit from the education they can get from watching this show. Please just tag them and they can watch the replay. This was our issue. This was our episode on African-American inequality in the financial sector. And that's what we were talking about today. Our guest was Shomari Wills, the story of the first 6 African-Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires in America. What a story. Please check it out. Please connect with his show Wills on Twitter, Shomari Wills. Please find the book and please check it out. Tomorrow, I have 2 shows. One is my radio show that you can watch from anywhere in the world, WBAI 99.5 FM in New York and WBAI.org, anywhere in the world. And our guests tomorrow are Jamila McMitchener, who is a professor at Cornell's American Studies program, and Professor Noliwe Rooks, who is a professor of Africana Studies at Cornell. And the amazing thing, as you heard, is that there was a time when even African-American schools or historically Black colleges were against having Black studies programs, and now Ivy League schools have Black studies programs. That's noon to 2 tomorrow, 2-hour call-in show. Please join us anywhere in the world, noon to 2 Eastern time. It's a radio-only, WBAI.org, and it's our 11th week of that show. It's the 86th episode of this show, and tomorrow is episode 87, and we're going to talk to you about talking to kids about race, and Amber Coleman-Mortley is going to join us. She is at Mother of All Capes on Twitter, and her 3 daughters are going to join us, and we're going to talk about talking to kids about race, and she has a very special episode of her series Let's Better K-12 podcast, and you can see the URL right on the screen, bit.ly/Mother of All Capes, and you can listen to that episode and then meet all 4 hosts of the episode tomorrow right here on this show, on our daily global COVID-19 show. I'm so grateful to everybody for watching, for everyone for their suggestions of speakers, themes, guests. I'm also grateful to our producers, Vandana Menon and Rose Horowitz. Thank you for all you do to make this show possible. And thank you for your hard work. And thank you for everyone who's listening and watching. Please suggest names. You can see right there, Sree@Sree.net. Where is it? Right there. And please email me. If you'd like to be on the show, you know someone who should be on the show, please let me know. And we want to thank our sponsors. We are always looking for sponsors. Art & Co. Get involved with the world's largest online art auction fundraising for COVID-19 victims, supporting 6 very important charities. artandco.net, artandco.net. Please check it out. You may have friends who could benefit from that. And finally, I want to tell you about our Muckrack Academy Fundamentals of Social Media course aimed at journalists and public relation folks, but open to everyone who wants to be a better communicator. It's a free course, muckrack.co/social, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. Please tag a friend, share a friend with this. It's a free certification. It starts in 2 weeks, and you will get a free certificate and a chance to learn a lot. I have learned a lot doing this. 3,500 people have signed up already, and we would love to have more of you sign up. So please tag your friends, share with your friends right now, mrac.co/social. And we are just grateful to all of you for being here and being part of this show and everything we're doing. 87th show comes tomorrow. We want your feedback, your ideas. Let's take a look. Apollo says, roll call, rest in peace. Thank you. Diana says, rest in peace. Rose says, thanks everyone for joining us. The Sree's WBAI show sounds great. A big shout out to Lisa Henderson, who's been tweeting my WBAI shows. And Renee says, thank you to me, Rose, and Vandana, and to Show Wills. And so many folks are saying thank you. And Diana says, thanks, great guest. And Jonathan, who's watched 86 straight episodes, I can't believe it, is here. And Rick says, great eclectic selection of guests. Thank you. And Jacqueline says, thank you both. And here is Apollo saying, Sree, you keep me sane. Thank you. You all keep me sane by being here with me every night. Sometimes we're during the day, but we are very grateful to each of you. We are going to tackle voting issues. We're going to tackle issues around journalism and the crisis. All of that we're going to cover. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your generous support of this show by just sharing. The simplest thing you can do to share this is to hit retweet or hit share or tag a single friend. And, well, married friends also welcome. But just tag anybody and get this out there so more people can benefit. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you soon. Email me, Sree@Sree.net. Follow me on